So the Seahawks made a trade today, bringing in Sam Howell for a swap of picks. The Seahawks moved down from the middle of the third round, 78th overall, to go to the very top of the fourth round, and then they swapped their fifth rounder for an early sixth rounder with the Washington Commanders. First impressions were that I'm not a huge fan of the trade. I've never been a big fan of Sam Howell, had him graded in the fourth round going into the 2022 draft. Didn't ever really buy into the idea that he was going to be the future of the Washington Commanders last year. There was a lot of high volume, a lot of production early on in the season. A lot of people in Washington thought that maybe he could be the answer. And then it just kind of tailed off as Washington's season did. And I think a lot of people pointed to the offensive line. Actually, their pass blocking percentage was pretty good. He was holding on to the ball a lot. He was turning the ball over a lot. Eventually got benched, then he came back in. It kind of unraveled a bit at the end. And that's one of the reasons why the Commanders are picking second overall. They didn't seem to have any thought that he would be with the team after signing Marcus Mariota. It's been inevitable that he was going to move on. And I just thought he was going to be in the same boat as Mac Jones, that it was going to be like a sixth round throwaway pick, that he would go somewhere to be the backup. Now, his last season was probably, I was going to say it's better than anything Matt Jones has shown, but Matt Jones had a very good rookie season. So I don't know if it's fair to say that, but Matt Jones's tenure with the Patriots had completely collapsed. So it's probably that Howell is sort of the most immediate example on tape that he's had is superior to Jones. So you can make an argument that he should have gone for more stock than Matt Jones did to Jacksonville. But it just seems, I don't know, I just didn't like the look of it. You know, seeing it on social media that the Seahawks had moved one of their picks out of round 3 and into round 4, and now they're not in round 5 at all. And they've just got essentially what is a throwaway sixth round pick in this class, which does not extend great depth all the way through to round 6. It just made me think, a little bit disappointed, you know, when you don't have a second round pick and then you sort of see those 2/3 next to each other. When you're doing the mock draft simulators, you can usually get a couple of good players in that range. And now they've almost traded down a full round to go out of the third round. I mean, like, they didn't even manage to keep hold of the higher of the 2 third-round picks. You know, they gave away 78 instead of 81. And I just didn't like the look of the trade itself, written down online, all for a backup quarterback. I mean, John Schneider's come out and basically said on Seattle Sports tonight that Geno's the guy, Sam Howell's the backup. When he was asked, is it even a competition, he almost sort of scoffed at the idea that there'd even be a serious competition between the two. So it looks a little bit as if the Seahawks have looked at this and thought, well, he's cheap. It's $980,000 cap hit. We've been seeing the likes of Joe Flacco and Gardner Minshew and people of that ilk go in for a lot of money in the last few days. The Seahawks do not have a lot of money to spend. So going and getting somebody who was cheap, that's got club control for a couple of years, they probably thought, well, it was worth swapping picks around to bring that person in and get some value there. That part of it is understandable. But for a player who, by all accounts, is probably not going to play for you apart from emergency situations, it still felt a little bit rich to me. And I think we've got a couple of occasions now when the Seahawks gave the second round pick to the New York Giants for Leonard Williams, essentially in order for the Giants to eat a lot of Leonard Williams's salary, because it was 10 games. So there was no reason to give the Giants a second and a fifth. They did so because the Giants made it cheap and affordable for the Seahawks. And now it seems that because Howell was cheap and affordable in terms of salary, they've now moved out of round 3 to acquire him. So not that blown away by the trade. It's not the end of the world either. It's not worth sort of fretting about beyond the end of today. It is what it is. They haven't lost any picks. They needed to add somebody before the draft. They couldn't go into the draft, even if their intention was to say to trade up. They couldn't go into the draft with just one quarterback on the books, because all it would take is the player that you are targeting to go a pick earlier than you expected, and What do you do then? Come away with no quarterback, try and scramble around to find a backup in June or May. And then what happens if you don't have an adequate backup and Geno Smith gets hurt in training camp? What do you do then? Do you have to go and then trade a stupid amount of picks to go and get somebody just to function as an offense? They had to do something. They had to bring somebody in. I suspect it was probably a big blow for them when Drew Lock decided that the Giants was a better opportunity for him, especially given how much they talked up Drew Lock. You don't talk up a player that much to not be disappointed when he moved on. And I think that happened. I don't know whether they caught them off guard or not, or but they've then had to pivot. And I think Schneider mentioned this, to looking at opportunities to trade for a quarterback. And this is what they've come up with. And it's quite expensive. But look, they had to bring somebody in. They had to go into the draft with a quarterback. What does it mean for the draft itself? I don't think it makes it less likely that they're going to draft a quarterback. I think if a quarterback is there who they like, they're clearly going to take the quarterback. They're not going to not take him because they've brought in Sam Howell for a swap of picks. I think this is more of a hedge. This is more of if the worst case scenario happens and you don't come out of this draft with a quarterback who could realistically at least be your backup quarterback, then you are covered. So I don't think it makes it any less likely that they're going to draft one. What I think it does suggest, though, is that perhaps they are minded that it's going to be difficult to draft a quarterback in this class. Either somebody that they like is not going to last to the 16th pick. It's going to be impossible to move up to get the guys that they want, or there's just too much of an unknown with, let's say, Michael Penix Jr. So to run through those three things, a month ago, if you'd have said JJ McCarthy with the 16th overall pick, the talk wouldn't have been, that's not going to happen. The talk would have been, really? You're going to take him that high? His stock has completely shifted over the last month to the point where he's now being projected as a realistic top 5 pick. There is a strong chance that the Minnesota Vikings, who are very analytically driven off the back of losing Kirk Cousins, having invested in all of the other areas of their roster, are preparing now to trade up to number 4 or to number 5 to make sure that they get JJ McCarthy. That could happen. In fact, a trade to the number 4 pick could happen long before the draft so that they guarantee one of the top 4 quarterbacks. That could happen in the next few weeks. Maybe after the pro days schedules are done, we may well hear about that. So if the top 4 picks are going to be all quarterbacks, or if the top 4 quarterbacks are going to go, let's say, in the top 6, that would make it very, very difficult for the Seahawks to trade up. It would take an astronomical amount to move up from 16 to number 3 or number 4. Not impossible, but extremely expensive. So you better really believe in Drake May or JJ McCarthy to be able to pull that off. And personally, I don't. I've not had either of those players graded with a firm first-round grade. I think May has got the physical tools to potentially become a very interesting NFL quarterback, but his footwork's poor, not consistent. I think he takes too many risks. I was never blown away watching him. There were several games that North Carolina should have won that they didn't win, and I think he could have played better in those games. I thought Spencer Rattler outplayed him when the two teams met, even though South Carolina, because they're a far worse team, lost that game. So I've never felt particularly great about Drake May, not enough to want to spend like the next 2 first-round picks on him. And then with McCarthy, I just think he's physically unspectacular. And I think there's an intangible quality there. You only have to listen to the guy speak for 5 minutes to see that. And I can well imagine that there are plenty of teams who think, get this guy in the building. We want this guy to be our leader. But I'm sorry, the tape just does not correlate with somebody that you trade an absolute haul to go up. It doesn't even correlate with somebody that you take in the top 10 or in the first round at all. I'm not saying he's always awful, because he isn't. There are some really good plays on tape that you can find. There's also a lot of stuff that you just shrug your shoulders at and go, meh. Like, I do not think he is a top 10 talent physically, and I don't think he makes up for it. I know that the third downs are good. Let's see how good those third downs are when he's not playing for Harbaugh's Michigan, who just blew everybody away. And I know people are going, well, it's not his fault. They only threw so many times against Penn State because they ran the ball so much. Yeah, but you don't be able to do that in the NFL. Like if you're taking a quarterback in the top 10 or if you're trading up for a quarterback, you expect them to be able to win you a game with their arms sometimes. That's what franchise quarterbacks do. The table cannot be set for them every single week. And I don't believe that JJ McCarthy is going to go into the NFL and win games on his own. I just don't think he is. So I don't think you trading up for him would have been wise either. So neither of those two are going to last to 16 in all likelihood. It's going to cost too much to trade up for them. So then you kind of look at it then as maybe a one quarterback draft for the Seahawks because I'm just not convinced that Bo Nix is going to be on their radar. Spencer Rattler might be. It's just hard to sort of square the circle in my mind that this is a team that has been character for 2 consecutive drafts without any compromises. And although you have to give Spencer Rattler a lot of credit for what he did, turning his career around, maturing at South Carolina, I think he's proven a lot of people wrong. And I think teams are going to be a lot higher on him than people in the media think. But I'm not sure whether John Schneider's going to see Spencer Rattler and go, that's the first quarterback that I'm taking since whenever they took Alex Magoo, and the first quarterback will have taken in the first 3 rounds in 12 years. I'm just not sure. I think somebody will take him earlier than people think. I'm just not convinced it'll be the Seahawks. It might be, not ruling it out either. Just not sure it is. So if it's not Nix and it's not Rattler, that kind of leaves Penix. The problem with Penix is, in terms of making a plan for him in the draft is it is not beyond the realms of possibility that he goes to the Raiders in the first round at number 13. It's not even beyond the realms of possibility he goes at number 11. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the Giants trade down a few spots and they take him. There's a real chance he could go very early. But there's also a chance that a lot of the people who are saying second round or day 2 are correct. And if the Seahawks think like him, but only in day 2, let's say that they think we're open-minded to taking him, say, in the 40 to 60 range, but not at number 16. So let's say they trade down and are open-minded to drafting Michael Penix. It's so hard. You can't trade down and then manipulate the board to suit you to take Penix. So you have to be guarded against that situation as well. So by taking Sam Howell, they are now, if Penix is on their radar, but only after trading down, now they're covered if trading down and having extra picks still doesn't result in drafting Michael Penix. So that's what I mean by that. They could still draft him, but it might be on their terms with their grade, not just taking him at 16. Therefore, you have to have a cover against the worst case scenario. Therefore, Sam Howell is your hedge. That's why it makes sense. The only thing that I'm not saying that acquiring Howell in itself is a terrible decision or doesn't make sense. It's just that when I saw that trade pop up on Twitter or X, and I see that the Seahawks have moved out of the 3rd round with that 1 pick, I didn't like it. Because for me, I've said for a few months now, a few months, it's March, that the meat of this draft's going to be day 2. And now the Seahawks only have 1 pick in day 2. And that is, as of today, a little bit disappointing. I do think there are a lot of interesting players in this draft. I don't want it to be 1st round pick, 3rd round pick, and then, your next ones are in the 4th round and then the 6th round. It doesn't work for me, that. So what does that mean? I think it means there's a very, very good chance now that they're going to trade down from number 16, fill out their board, acquire possibly a lot. I mean, it might not be just one trade. It could be they go from 16 to 25, 25 to 34, and then you've stacked up on 2nd and 3rd round picks, and they pad out the roster and fill a load of depth. That could be a plan. And given what I've just said about the meat of this draft being day 2, I don't think it's the worst plan in the world. You could come up with 4 or 5 players who are graded quite decently in that range who can contribute. So I don't mind trading down at all. The only thing is that every time I sit to sort of pull the curtain back a little bit here, I don't publish a mock draft every week, but I'm constantly doing them at home. if I get a spare second, if a thought pops in my head, I hear an interesting idea, I like to run through different scenarios. So I'll either go on the Sportskeeda mock draft and sort of just pick every team and do it myself, or I'll just write on a note on my laptop, if this happened, if this player goes there, what would this mean for here? Well, how would this impact pick 16? And every time that I've sort of done a scenario recently where I've had the Seahawks trading down and looked through it, I've always kind of like got to Seattle's pick at, say, 25, 28, whatever it is. And I've always kind of thought, I don't like the options here. I'm either going to take somebody who's a reach and you'd probably be more comfortable taking another 10 picks later. Or I'm looking at 16 and I'm thinking, yeah, sure, I've traded down here and I've got extra stock. But the player at 16 was a lot better than the player I'm picking here. So it bothers me a little bit that if the idea is to trade down, that they might trade down and miss out on somebody really good. You only have to look at what happened this week with Fletcher Cox retiring. The Seahawks traded down from number 12 in 2012 to 15. The Eagles took Fletcher Cox. Look at the career he's had. Now, the Seahawks took Bruce Irvin. He didn't have a bad career. They want Fletcher Cox. So sometimes you can move down and you can miss out on a player like that. And if they did move off one of these really good offensive tackles, especially given the increasing concern about A. Lucas, or if they snubbed the chance to take Chop Robinson, let's say, or Jared Verse, or Brock Bowers, or one of those kind of quality players, then it would be hard if they then just have to sort of settle a little bit at the back end of round one. That, to me, feels like a surefire way to end up with LJ Collier instead of Brian Burns, or the guy who went to Green Bay whose name I can't remember. But do you see what I mean? It's like the better options, whether it's O-line, D-line, or like just a skill player, if you want to call Bowers a skill player, that's a 16. When you move down to 25, the options are not as good. I don't think you're going to get a player that you sort of go, yes, fantastic, in the 20s. But then if you move to 34, 35, 40 or whatever, you probably feel okay about the player you're taking in that range. And maybe if you take a player at 40, let's say, and that's quite a significant drop, and you say, yeah, and we've got like 5 more picks to spend that are healthy picks and maybe some stock for next year as well, potentially, you might think that's okay. But I'm telling you now that the difference in quality between the player at 25 and the difference in quality of player at 40 is not, I don't think there'll be any difference there. So I don't know if it's necessarily worth trading down that much. And if they don't trade down from 16, then it just feels like, they're going to pick once and then the draft becomes that player to an extent. You then have to wait to 81. From 16 to 81. Think how many players are going to come off the board in that zone to wait for the Seahawks to pick again at 81. And then you've got to wait to the top of round 4. And you get a couple of 4th rounders. And then you're into sort of the dregs of the draft. When you get to that 6th round, you're probably into priority free agents already. So I don't know. That just doesn't seem a great plan for this draft, for this team in this position right now. So for me, if you were going to have a successful draft, you would have to smash it out the park at 16. Like that 16 pick, you would have to make a great pick. But if you trade down and trade down and trade down and you get quantity, you also can't afford to watch another team take someone at 16, 17, 18, 19 that you could have had and they become amazing if you end up with a bunch of, 3rd round, like Tedrick Thompson types and Mike Tyson types, like that year they traded down loads and loads and loads. It was the Malik McDowell draft, when there were other better players like TJ Watt on the board that you could have had. So that's kind of like a little bit of the concern I have with trading down. But I do think, given after this trade, it feels more likely. I can see teams like Green Bay looking to move up for a left tackle because they've created a hole there. I can imagine teams wanting to come and get the first cornerback. I can imagine teams coming to get Brian Thomas Jr. as the 4th receiver. So I think there's going to be a lot of interest in that pick. And maybe it's from a team in the back end of the 20s, and rather than giving you a 2nd round, and they give you a 1st for next year, and they go 2 firsts, trade down, and maybe the Seahawks think, great, and that'll help us for next year if they want to go quarterback hunting. Maybe that's what they'll decide to do. And then they can trade down again if they want to get into the second round, and they can maybe get another third rounder. Maybe that's what they'll do. I think everything's on the table. But I do think it's more likely today that they trade down than it was before. I think it's perhaps indicative that they don't think they can trade up for a quarterback or they will get one at all, and they want to hedge for that. And I do think it was for the first time today, John Schneider said, Geno's the guy. And he was never saying that before, which I think it validates the idea that they were very open-minded, potentially trading Geno Smith this year. There just wasn't a market. They've gone with him. It's probably one of the reasons why they taught Drew Lock up, so that if Geno goes, you get Drew Lock back. But then as soon as it became obvious that there was no market for Geno and they kept him and they restructured his deal, that made it less likely that Drew Lock was going to come back because he knew he wasn't going to beat Geno Smith out. So he's gone to New York. I think that's how that's played out. So they've gone bring Sam Howell in. He's the backup. He's cheap. Still don't like the trade all that much, but there we go. Quick thought on the rest of free agency. I've got no complaints with what the Seahawks have done. Re-signing Leonard Williams makes a lot of sense. No issues with that whatsoever. Quality player. Is it 2 or 3 million more than I perhaps would have hoped? Yeah. Was it worth losing him for $2-3 million? No. I'm very comfortable bringing Noah Fant back. I look forward to seeing what he can do in Ryan Grubb's offense, because there's definitely a dynamic tight end in Noah Fant. Just needs the right coach to bring it out, and I think we maybe got that now. Rayshon Jenkins, like him, I think good leader, good player. I think he's exactly what I wanted them to do. This is what I wanted them to do. I wanted them to save money at linebacker and safety and put it into the trenches. They've spent an absolute fortune on Leonard Williams. They brought in George Fant as John Schneider got a utility player, perhaps swing tackle. And they're saving money at safety and linebacker, which is what I've been calling for years. So 2 thumbs up from me for that. I'm trying to think of Nick Harris comes in, just depth at center and competition. So I'm quite content. I did not want them to be aggressive. There's no deal out there that I'm jealous of. I didn't care less about keeping Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner and Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. See you later, guys. And that is with the respect to Bobby Wagner, of course, who's a franchise legend. But I thought it was time to move on. Richard Sherman's comments that it showed a lack of loyalty from the Seahawks is total and utter nonsense, because what was the alternative? Just keep signing Bobby Wagner until he said he'd had enough? Is that the only way to show loyalty? And then the fact that the Seahawks gave him 2 huge contracts and then brought him back is loyalty enough? You can't just expect a team to re-sign a player for the sake of it, for the feels, until he's decided he's had enough just because he was a legendary player. Maybe he should re-sign Walter Jones if he fancies another go, just because loyalty. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that. Richard Sherman just needs to put the microphone down for a little bit and stop talking utter rubbish. So yeah, I'm quite happy with the way that things have gone. I think it's a transition year. There's going to be growing pains for the new staff, offense and defense. I don't think splashing out on long-term commitments in free agency was a good idea. I think some of the money that's been spent in free agency is a joke. A lot of people want Jonah Jackson. I've heard, a lot of people saying that, on the radio and on Twitter, Jonah Jackson, what a great player. He signed him for $17 million. He was something like the 64th graded guard via PFF. I think people it was like a Detroit boost for his reputation and stock. Played on that line, so must be great. Well, he didn't play great last year. He was a former 3rd round pick. I'd got him graded in the 4th round. There's plenty of players you could draft in the 3rd, 4th round who can come in and do the job that Jonah Jackson's done in Detroit. The key is to identify who that is and then develop them. And now, hopefully, the Seahawks have got the staff to do that. It doesn't have to be the number 16 pick, or it doesn't have to be Powers Johnson with the 20-odd pick. It doesn't have to be, a player drafted at the top of round 2 to play guard. It can be somebody that you draft on day 2 or even the early part of day 3. There are the players in this draft to be able to do that. It's a very, very good offensive line class. But that's the thing. You don't have to spend $17 million on an average guard. Just go and find your own version of Jonah Jackson, but actually find someone better than him, because he didn't have a great year last season. And I have no idea how he's parlayed that into a $17 million a year contract. Just as I don't understand how Damian Lewis is suddenly worth $13.25 million. And I don't understand how Robert Hunt, who I liked, he was a blog favorite going into the draft, and he did well for Miami last season. He's not worth $20 million a year. So I think that the Seahawks were right to just be restrained, to be calculated, to understand where they are in the process. year one of a new regime. This year, more than anything, is about setting up the systems for the future, defense and offense, putting your ducks in a row, having another draft class that gets a very high grade that enables you to keep adding talent. That's where it is. The only thing is, the only slight problem is eventually they're going to have to do something at quarterback for the long haul. Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, all traded up for their franchise quarterbacks. They were bold, they were aggressive, they were decisive, they backed their judgment, and they were proven right. Eventually, John Schneider is going to have to do that. And if it's not this year, they can't keep kicking the can down the road. But otherwise, I think it's been a very good start to free agency. I just wish they hadn't lost that third round pick to move back into round 4 with the Sam Howell trade, or swapping that 5th for a 6th rounder as well. It just seems too expensive for a player who had no future with the Washington Commanders. Anyway, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Put them in the comments section. Like the video. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Check out my interview with Mekhi Wingo. What a person to speak to, the LSU defensive tackle. Thoroughly enjoyed chatting to him. You will love him if you listen to the interview. And you are also going to love Brennan Jackson, the Washington State defensive end who I had the pleasure of speaking to earlier today. That interview is going to go up on the channel probably on Friday. So check that out as well. If you subscribe, you'll never miss any of these. Let's get those subs up. It's getting closer to 10K. Let's get it up to 10K. Like the video. Leave a comment. Check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Until next time, bye for now.